EQ, one of the most important tools in audio production, is so fundamental to the process. You have to know how to use it. Today, I'm going to give you guys some tips and a system of techniques that you can utilize anytime you reach for an EQ to take your mixes from average to amazing. Let's get right to it. Every sound is made up of frequencies, which is a cycle per second. Humans can roughly hear from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz or kilohertz if you may. This is a typical range of a typical EQ, and an EQ allows you to adjust these frequencies. Different sounds live in different regions. Instruments have fundamentals and overtones which make up its timbre, its characteristic, and how it sounds. So with that general base knowledge in mind, I'm now going to be giving you guys some tips and a system of techniques that you can use every time you reach for an EQ that's not only used by me, but many music producers around the world. But if you're an absolute beginner and have no clue about the basics of how to use an EQ and parameters and such not, you can click the first link in the description below where I've linked a 4-minute video describing the basics of how to use an EQ. So let's imagine two performers playing two different instruments, but they're playing the same melody. On the recording, we can hear an overlap. This effect is called masking. In music, a lot of times we want to give each instrument its own space to breathe, and we want to reduce masking. Keep in mind, you can't completely change the sound using EQ. You can sculpt, mold, but it's more of like adjusting and not generating. With that in mind, let's move on. The last thing I want to touch on before we get into these tips are EQ charts. They've become increasingly popular over the last couple years, and I think they're great for beginners or people who really don't know how to communicate what they're hearing in a recording. As you improve, try to use them less and less. In some scenarios, they can cause you to blindly mix without trying to address the situation in your specific song. With that in mind, let's get on to the tips. The first tip, which I think is the king of all tips, is to have intention. You want to use your ears and not your eyes. You're going to make sure you know or you have an idea of what you're trying to get, what you're trying to adjust. So, for example, I have this guitar loop that sounds like this. And to my ear, it sounds a little bit muddy. So my intention is to bring more clarity. And I'm going to do this by subtracting a little bit of that muddiness from the 200 to 500 Hertz range and try to dip it out a little bit. Let's compare the difference between the two. Yeah, I know it's subtle, but trust me, it makes a difference. The second tip is to prioritize cuts, but still use boosts. Oftentimes, when you boost in the frequency spectrum, you can make the overall audio file sound louder, and this can trick you into thinking that it sounds better, even when it doesn't. A good rule of thumb is to cut narrow and boost wide. Try to be as minimalistic as possible when making cuts or boosts. This can help the overall sound. But don't take this tip to the extreme and obsess over subtractive EQ. Sometimes you may need to boost in specific scenarios, but always try to keep the rule of thumb in mind. The third tip is to try to avoid EQing in solo. Here's the truth. No one's gonna listen to your beat or your track in solo. You can totally misinterpret the relationship between the rest of the mix and the function you want the instrument that you're EQing to serve in the mix when you EQ in solo. If the change is too subtle, you can use a technique by exaggerating the frequency you're adjusting by boosting it by a lot or cutting it by a lot and then adjusting it to find the sweet spot. And a bonus tip you should also keep in mind is that small changes do compound. As you get more confident, the more aggressive you can be with your cuts and boosts. But as now, you should keep it as minimalistic as possible. That 2 dB you took out of the piano and that 1.5 dB you took out of the guitar is going to help the clarity of your track tremendously when everything adds up in the end. The only exception you can say to this is filters. High pass and low pass filters can be a little more aggressive, but don't be one of those people that throws aggressive high pass filters on everything. Sometimes, yeah, it's justified. You may have an instrument that's just taking a lot of static noise in the low end and you want to high pass it out. But a lot of times you can take a lot of character out of instruments or certain sounds. So you analyze and see when it's fit. So before we get into the 4-step system that you can use when EQing any sound or track, make sure you check out my community page. Every Monday I'll be posting questions or polls so you can give feedback on what videos you guys want to see, so I can always bring you guys the best content. Let's get right to it now. So step 1. This step applies to an overall mix, and it's to put your mix in mono. This can not only help you with your leveling, but it can also identify conflicting elements which need to be addressed with EQ and spatial help. So take a listen to your track in mono and identify what you want to be prominent, where you want to create space, and what you want to adjust. The next step is to apply surgical EQ. This is where you specifically find frequencies that are troublesome to the mix. So you could use the boost and sweep method and find these frequencies, and what you're looking for is a drastic increase in volume in that area that you have a troublesome frequency and you just want to notch it out. This can help you to get to your desired sound of the instrument and the overall sound of the track. Let's take a listen to this example. So most of the mud that I'm hearing is coming from this secondary reverse melody right here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get an EQ, boost it, search around for that frequency. I think it's in a 200 range. And then make it narrow and notch it out. Let's take a listen to before and after. The next step is to enhance the best parts. So after you surgically remove the nasty frequencies that you don't like, you can go ahead and now accentuate the frequencies that you do like to improve the overall sound. So let's say I have an unfinished beat that sounds like this. The guitar part, it's just amazing. I know the magic is in the mid-range, so I want more clarity, I want more feel out of it. So I reach for my EQ and I start boosting that area that I want to accentuate. Wide boost, not too much, it's around 3 dB or less, and I put a little bit of air on it. Let's take a listen to the before and after. The final step is to tame the low end, and this doesn't only apply to the low end, but you can use this taming method for anywhere in the mix using pocket EQ, which just means that you're gonna duck one and boost one on the other. So let's say I have an 808. I'll probably duck a little bit of the 120 hertz out of the 808 and boost more of it on the kick so I can bring more of the kick out and less of the 808. It's pretty much that simple. Whatever you cut on one instrument by a certain amount, you boost on another instrument by that same amount. So let's go over the 4 steps real quickly. 1. Put your mix in mono and take a listen to it. 2. Use surgical EQ to take away troublesome frequencies in instruments or your entire mix. 3. Enhance the best parts to accentuate your favorite frequencies and make sounds even better. 4. Use pocket EQ to help things fit in the mix, taming the low end and throughout the mix. With that being said, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.